I'm Nina, and my FBI, my faith building incident, is losing a child. I grew up in Huntsville, Alabama, had wonderful parents, thought I had a fantastic childhood, didn't know how blessed I really was. Although I did see myself as the child who wasn't supposed to be there. My dad was in college when I was born. He was going to school at Vanderbilt on the GI Bill, and they had already had my sister. Let's see, that would have been when my sister was about 4 months old. They found out they were expecting again. They were wondering how in the world they were going to make it, and because they couldn't pay the doctor bill, and and they were very worried, concerned about that. So my mother told me later that when she found out she was expecting me, she just cried. And even though my parents never said it, they never tried to convey anything except love for me, I told myself I wasn't supposed to be here. I'm the one who made the problem for my family. I'm the one who made my mother cry. Brother was born about 3.5 years later, and my dad said, we got a boy, so we decided we were done. And I asked him once, if I had been a boy, would you have stopped then? He said, probably so. And so that kind of said to me, oh, I was wrong all the way around. I was the wrong gender. I was, not supposed to be here. They didn't mean for me to happen. I was the accident. So in my own mind, I kept trying to justify my existence and be worthy enough to be here and to take up the space. I didn't know I was doing that, of course, but it's what I was doing. Anyway, but I still had a wonderful childhood. My parents were great and loved my brother and sister dearly, and just had a very happy growing up. I worked for NASA in logistics one summer, and but then when I started college, I started at UAH and did a couple of semesters. Actually, it was quarters at that time there, and then switched to Calhoun for a little while, and then after Calhoun went to UNA, and was planning to finish at UNA, but that was where I met my future husband, and fell for him because he seemed to love God and want to purposefully, intentionally follow Jesus. I had, these lofty imaginations that we would, have these discussions at our kitchen table talking about scripture, and it was just going to be beautiful. Had 3 boys within 3 years. So, and my mother loved to tell people when we were out and had all 3 of them together, she'd say, Lisa's 3 under the age of 3. It was a hectic time. Once I started having children, I didn't work because, I had kids at home and they were little, and I don't think we could have afforded daycare for that many kids. And it balanced out with me still working. So after I'd had the first child and then the second one, 2 boys, my husband informed me he was having an affair. And about 2 weeks after that, I found out I was expecting the 3rd one. So over the next 4 years, we got lots of counseling, but it's a long story, but things did not improve. And there turned out to be more than one other person outside of the marriage. After the birth of my 3rd one, we were still together for quite some time, but eventually we did divorce. And I never anticipated getting married again, didn't want to get married again. But God led me to a church that had a fantastic singles department. I wasn't looking for anyone. I didn't want to hook up with anyone. I didn't want a relationship, a romantic relationship. There were so many of them who were about pursuing a relationship with God and serving other people. And once I saw that and saw that it wasn't just a, single mingle group, then I decided, okay, I could be a part of that. Met someone, God, led us together, led us to each other, and then we did end up getting married in very short order. I found myself pregnant again. That was a boy that we lost in the womb. And very shortly after that, I was pregnant again. And that was our first daughter together. And then we had 2 more girls after that. So the whole span of my kids is 20 years. My oldest is 20 years older, 20 years and 1 day older than my youngest one. I considered myself a Christian because I'd made a profession of faith when I was 13. But what I remember growing up is, even though my parents were also faithful in the church, and I could tell it affected their lives, there were certain things they wouldn't do, and there was never any bad language at our house. They put a value on honesty, integrity. So I grew up with those things. But what I didn't hear during the week was anybody talk about God. I didn't ever see anybody studying their Bible. So I grew up sort of with an idea that, God is there and I'm interested in Him. And I love when I go to church and I love what I'm hearing. See, I almost feel like I make people uncomfortable when I ask questions, because I would hear my mother lower her voice and, well, to answer your question, which made me feel like, oh, maybe I wasn't supposed to ask this, or not in front of people or something, almost like they may have been a little bit shy or embarrassed. But I remember growing up, I was very interested and wanted to know more, wanted to go to church, wanted to have more of God in our lives. I longed to worship with my family, or to be able to talk about these things with my family. And when I would try to talk about them with my family, I kind of felt like I made them uncomfortable, like maybe they just weren't as interested as I was. I got involved in a local church, one that I could walk to when I was in my teens, because some of my friends from school went there and they were having revival services and they invited me. And I liked the fact that I didn't have to wait on anyone to take me to church, because sometimes I wanted to go to church and my parents would say, yeah, we're not going today. We don't feel like it today. So I was very grateful to have a church I could walk to, and I had so many friends there. And of course, I started inviting my family to come. And so I thought that I had made a profession of faith when I was 13. I had written a poem about God, and my parents saw it. My mom said, I think this means maybe you want to be saved. Do you want to be saved? Because if you do, we'll take you to talk to the pastor. And I said, well, yes, I want to be saved. So they took me to talk to the pastor, and he asked me some questions, and I guess I answered them right. And so I was baptized when I was 13. I wasn't saved, because there was no real change in me, and I was still hungry, too hungry. There was nothing that really satisfied. I did love going to church. I loved the community. And looking back now, I recognize what I wanted, I think, as much as anything. I wanted to be right with God, but I also wanted to be right. I wanted to know that I was doing the right things, saying the right things. And I didn't know that was self-righteousness, but that's how I felt, and that's what I was wanting. So being at church, to some degree, kind of made me feel like, okay, I am doing the right thing. I'm saying all the right things. I'm being with the right people. You know, and I think I thought I was earning God's favor, you know, justifying my existence here by, I'm glorifying God. That's what I'm supposed to be here for. I still remember there was a man in our church, Mr. Sloan, and every time he would give a testimony about what God meant to him, he would just start weeping. I mean, tears just rolling down his cheeks because of all the emotion, how much God meant to him. And I'd watch him and I'd think, I don't feel that way. He's got something I don't. What's missing? Fast forward, I had gotten married, had the 3 boys. I was at church, and we had a rack of tracts. You know, those tracts where people would take them, they'd have the 4 spiritual laws in it, or, whatever, telling you how to get saved. And I had read all of those. I'd passed those out before, thought I knew all that stuff. But there was a new tract in there. And frankly, I kind of looked down my nose at tracts. I was like, nobody ever reads those anyway. And I've never heard of anyone getting saved by reading it. And I just thought they didn't really work. But I'm very much a reader. And I was at church one day waiting for someone. And I was standing right next to that rack. And I looked up and there was one that said, "Will you love God in heaven?" And the very fact that it asked the question implied that maybe not. And I thought, well, of course you will. You're in heaven and you're there because, you know, what's not to love in heaven? And so, but I wanted to read this track because I was looking to see, where's the error in this thing? Because there's got to be some error in here. And I opened it up and started reading, and it was pointing out, do you love God now? Because if you don't love him now, you're not going to magically love him in heaven. And if you don't love him now, you're not going to be in heaven. And wow, that hit me between the eyes. Because I recognized, I thought, I don't love God. I get uncomfortable when I think of spending time alone with him. When I go to pray, I don't know what to say. It's like talking to a stranger. And if I feel this way now, they're right. That's not going to magically change if I get to heaven. If I get to heaven, I may not make it to heaven. Oh my goodness. And then I realize I've been trying almost all my life to make myself love God like Mr. Sloan does. And I haven't managed to do it. What hope is there for me? And then I despaired because I really thought, oh my goodness, if I haven't been able after all this time and all this effort and everything I've done to make myself love God, I'm afraid I never will be able to. And if I never love God, I won't get to heaven. So I started looking in the scriptures, started looking in my Bible. Is there any hope for me? What does God say about people like me? Is there a chance that people who don't love God get to heaven? And I did find hope. Because what I saw over and over and over again was it's God who changes the heart. I couldn't do that for myself. I couldn't make myself love God. But God could work that change in me. So I started praying for that. I started asking him, please cause me to love you the way I know you deserve to be loved. Because what I read about you in the scripture, oh my goodness, do you deserve to be loved? But it's not in me. And I even read in the scripture that it wasn't in me, that there was nothing good in me that would cause me to love him. And all my righteousness was as dirty rags. On my very best days, all my righteousness was as dirty rags. So there was nothing in me to recommend me to God, nothing in me to make me love him to produce that kind of love. And I knew only God could do that for me. And I asked him to do that for me. And I thought, still thinking like, I'm going to have to work at this. I thought, okay, maybe if I keep reading my Bible faithfully and I keep praying faithfully, that eventually God will do this for me. Like maybe after a year or two or a few years. I just didn't think it was going to happen overnight. But what I did know was, well, I'm not praying regularly right now, and I'm not studying my Bible regularly. And oh my goodness, God at least deserves my attention, on a regular basis. So I decided that's what I was going to do. I was going to give him my attention on a regular basis. But I didn't want to lie to him either. I didn't want to promise him, I'm going to give you an hour every day, although I felt like, oh, you deserve far more than that. But, what, realistically speaking, God, what can I tell you I'm going to do and know for certain that I will do it? And all I came up with was a measly 5 minutes. But I had 3 boys at home, and I was thinking, what if I get to the end of a day and it's just been a crazy day and one of them has been awake all the time and I haven't had time to, at least I can do 5 minutes before I go to bed. I know I can. I can do that much. So every day for at least 5 minutes, I was praying and I had my Bible open and I was reading, even though I didn't really understand a lot of things. And I'm reading, and finally one day I realize I'm saying, okay, God, thank you for this day, and thank you for this lovely weather we're having. Thank you for my family. 4 minutes left. Thank you for, um, and one day I just got real with him and I said, who am I trying to kid? I don't know what to say to you. I don't know how to talk to you. I feel like you're a stranger and I don't know what to do. And God met me right there. I said, I don't even know what to read. And I just opened my Bible and let it fall open to something, which is not something I usually recommend to people. But for that day, I opened my Bible and I saw, my sheep know my voice and they will not follow another. And I thought, okay, how do I get to know your voice? Because frankly, Lord, I feel like that's part of what my problem is. How do I know when it's you telling me? How do I know when it's not just my own voice saying to me something I want to hear, tickling my own ears? And right at that moment, my telephone rang. And it was a friend of mine who has a speech impediment. I'd known her for years, since I was in 7th grade. And when I answered the phone and I said hello, I heard her voice and I knew instantly who it was. And she talks a little slow, so she was saying, hello, this is, and gave her name. She was speaking slowly and she got out, hello, Nina. And I said, oh, hi. And I called her by name. And she said, this is, how did you know it was me? And I said, well, I just know your voice. And bam, God speaks to me. And he said, you knew her voice because you've spent time with her. You've been around her all that time. Spend that kind of time with me and you'll know my voice too. I will speak to you. I will make myself plain. I will cause you to understand me. So after that, every time I sat down for my 5 minutes, I would say, okay, God, what are we going to talk about today? What is it you want to tell me? What is it you want me to tell you? Show me where I should be reading. And he started giving me things and sending me places in the scriptures, and I'd hear things other places and then I'd go look it up. And next thing I know, I'd be doing this, of course, when my kids were down for a nap. Next thing I know, they're up from the nap, and I think, oh, it's been an hour? Really? I couldn't believe it. Things were leaping off the page at me. And I'd think, I know I read that before, but I don't remember that being in there at all. It's because I had no spirit in me, no Holy Spirit in me. And I had been wondering at this point, am I saved yet or not? I don't know. I don't feel like I love God yet, but I don't know. When I got to that place where I realized I was going an hour and wishing for more time because I just couldn't get enough of Him, I realized, oh, He did it. He did it. I do love Him now. I do love being around Him. I don't know when it happened, but I know I love Him now. God, am I really saved? Do I need to get baptized again? What? And He answered me on that. He said, yes, I want you to be baptized. And no, it doesn't matter when it happened. I birthed you into the kingdom. The babies don't know when they were born either. Someone has to tell them later what their birth date was. So it's okay that you don't know for certain the very moment. What matters is that I did birth you into the kingdom, and you have my Holy Spirit now. And I am talking to you, and we have this relationship. And after that, everything was different. My FBI, my faith building incident, is losing a child. My third son, Daniel, was born with a genetic liver disease called alpha 1 antitrypsin deficiency. Before he was even born, God had been talking to me all the time that I was reading my Bible. And as I was praying, He began to speak to me specifically about suffering, which had me shaking in my boots because I felt like I had never really suffered anything. I felt very out of my league when God started talking to me about suffering. I thought, I don't know what suffering you're bringing, and I'm not sure I know how to do this. And what if I don't stand? And what if I fall apart? And God was, again, speaking to me through the Bible and saying, I want you to draw close to me. I realized He's already as close as He could possibly get, but closer to Him means my attention is more focused on Him. Before I even knew I was expecting that son, my husband told me he was having an affair. And I thought, oh, there it is. That's the suffering. Because that felt like I had been punched in the stomach. And it was literally a physical pain that wouldn't go away. But all through the pregnancy, my husband had told me he was going to end the affair, but then he would tell me later he hadn't, and they'd actually seen each other again. And so things were still very much uncertain when my son was born. And just before he was born, I had a sense, and I didn't know whether this was from God or me just being worried, but I had a sense that something was not going to be right. So when he was born and the doctor said, there he is, a healthy baby boy, 8 pounds even, I thought, see, Nina, that's just you, trying to find something to worry about. But then I heard this voice in my head that said, just wait. I thought, oh. So over the next 6 weeks, I began to see that he was developing jaundice. The whites of his eyes turned yellow. He was not gaining weight like the other ones had. I took him to the doctor, and at first they were saying, oh, we just need to put him under these lights. You just need to have him sitting in a sunlit window. And then there might be some improvement. I started bottle feeding instead of breastfeeding. and he gained a little bit of weight from that. And but then, from 1 week when I took him in, he'd gained like 7 ounces. We were like, oh, good, we're on the right track now. The next week I'd take him in, and he hadn't gained anything, but he was drinking more of the bottles than ever. And I thought, something's still wrong. And sure enough, the doctor said, his liver is enlarged now, and it wasn't before. And you need to take him to the emergency room, take him to the hospital. I said, well, my mom's keeping my kids at home. Can I, go back? And he was like, no, you take him to the emergency room right now. He didn't tell me then, but he wondered if my son had hepatitis. And if he did, he was contagious. And he was like, no, you cannot take him back home. So we went straight to the emergency room. They started doing all of these tests, and they eventually narrowed it down to 3 things. And all of them were terminal. And I didn't know which one it was going to be. But the one I thought it was least likely to be is the one that it turned out that it was. But while we were in Huntsville Hospital waiting to find out, they said, if it turns out to be this one, we're going to send you to Vanderbilt. Because that's where they have doctors there who know more about that than we do. So I'm sitting in the hospital room, and I'm cradling him in my arms, and he's about 6 weeks old now, and I'm rocking him, and he's asleep. And I'm giving God every reason I can think of why he needs to spare my son's life and cause him to live. And God has an answer for everything I'm saying. And he's not assuring me that my child is going to live. And I'm thinking, Lord, how can I live with this kind of knowledge? How can anyone live with the knowledge that their child might die in their arms at any time? And in my head, I could see that happening, and I could see us going through his funeral, and I was feeling the grief. And I thought, I cannot live with this knowledge. How can I be there for my other kids? How can I be there for this child as long as he needs me when this is uppermost in my mind and this fear is overtaking me? And I didn't know what to do. And I was saying, God, I know I need to pray. But all I can think of is help. And God said, pray that I'll have someone pray for you. And I thought that was so lame. It's like, what if they don't? I thought of all the times that people had asked me to pray, and I hadn't. I thought, this is what I'm trusting to, that you're going to have somebody else pray for me? What if they don't? Where am I then? And what good is that going to do? And he said, are you going to trust me or not? I'll trust you. And I just started praying it over and over again. Please have someone pray for me. Please have someone pray for me. And all those thoughts that I had in my head of my son dying and the funeral and the thought that I might go crazy, they were all going around and around in my head. And while I was saying, please have someone pray for me, please have someone pray for me, all of a sudden, it was like a plug had been pulled in my mind, and all those thoughts started leaving. And I couldn't even, what had I been thinking? I couldn't even grasp them anymore. It's like they were just all gone. And once they were gone, there was one thing left, and I could tell there's one thing left in there. What is it? And I literally had to get very still and focused to hear it. And it was, I am the Lord thy God, and besides me, there is no other. And in that instant, I knew even if the worst I can think of happens, it's going to be okay. God knows what He's doing. And just then the phone rang, and I picked it up and I heard my mother's voice. And I thought, she already called once this evening. She usually only calls once an evening. She's already called. I thought something was wrong. And she said, no, no. She said, are you okay? And I said, yes, I'm good. And she said, because I was just standing here ironing one of your daddy's shirts, and all of a sudden, I just felt like you needed prayer. And I stopped and prayed for you. And at that moment, I knew I can't trust him. I thought that was so lame, and that he might have somebody pray for me who wouldn't, but he chose my own mother. And she didn't have to call me afterwards. That was just so that I could know. That was just the beginning, because over the next couple of days, they did diagnose Daniel with alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency. They told me it was a genetic disease, and they sent us to Vanderbilt. And at Vanderbilt, they assessed his situation and they said he's going to need a liver transplant. This was back in 1982. And they said, and if he doesn't get one, he'll die before he's 5. So after they gave us the diagnosis, we came home and we told my parents, and we all cried together. And the next day, my husband goes to work and he gets laid off. My son had to have a special formula. That's the reason he wasn't gaining weight, because he couldn't digest breast milk. He couldn't digest the regular formula. So he needed a special formula. And it was so expensive that we couldn't afford it. And we sure couldn't afford it now that my husband wasn't working. There was a ladies' Bible study at our church. And when they heard what our situation was, every Tuesday morning when they met for Bible study, they collected money to pay for my son's. And the people in our church were so supportive, so caring. Unfortunately, the situation with my husband had not changed. Part of the reason he got laid off was because of the affair. He'd been, talking on the phone when he should have been working. He'd been leaving when he should have been staying to go see his affair partner. And at the end of 6 months, Daniel had his first bleed, and that was him hemorrhaging internally, and then he'd be vomiting blood. At this point, my son had just turned 3. Actually, was not quite 3 yet. Alpha 1, the way it was explained to me then, that was a long time ago, so there may be a better explanation now, and I'm sure they know more about it now than they did back then. Back then, they had seen the evidence of it, but they didn't know what it was. So it didn't even have a name until the early 1980s. And my son was diagnosed in 1982 with it. So the way they explained it to me was trypsin is an enzyme, a digestive enzyme that your pancreas puts out into the bloodstream to help digest food. But it's so effective, it would digest your organs as well, except that the liver makes antitrypsin. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. And that antitrypsin gets into your bloodstream and counteracts the trypsin just enough so that it digests your food but doesn't digest your organs. In alpha 1 antitrypsin, the cells of the trypsin are misshapen. So a little bit like sickle cell anemia in that way, except it's not blood cells, it's the trypsin. And so they might be shaped like footballs or something, but they can't all get out of the liver. In, I think they said 90% of the alpha 1 antitrypsin deficiency cases, the enough of the antitrypsin can get out of the liver that it doesn't sit there and eat away at the liver, because it is an enzyme. So that's what it does if it's sitting in the liver. But not enough for it to fully counteract the trypsin in the bloodstream. But it might take, even almost a lifetime or 20, 30 years for you to see the effects of the trypsin having started digesting your organs. And the most sensitive ones are the lungs. So in 90% of alpha 1 antitrypsin cases, they first see the symptoms as lung disease, emphysema, etc., when the person is in their 20s or 30s. In 10% of the cases, so much of the trypsin can't get out that it sits in the liver and does damage to the liver, causing cirrhosis of the liver. And they see that in infancy or in early childhood. And Daniel was one of those 10%. And then they told me that because this is a genetic condition and it's recessive, a gene has to come from both parents to be able to have it. So since Daniel had it, that meant a gene came from both of us, and then they needed to test our other two children to see if either one of them have it, because one of them could, and we wouldn't see it till adulthood. So the nightmare is growing bigger. Now all my children might be affected. After the testing, it turned out my oldest one carried no gene for the disease. My middle one carried one gene for the disease, but not the other. So he didn't have the disease, but he can pass on the gene to his children. So, and of course, Daniel had two genes for the disease, and the disease was active in him. So that was the reason they told me his liver is going to fail. The cirrhosis is already beginning. When the liver starts getting hard, the liver is like a mass of blood vessels. So blood coming back to the heart on its way from the rest of the body passes through the liver. But as the liver gets hard and blood can't pass through it, it will reroute to other places to get back to the heart. But those other places it reroutes to weren't built to hold that kind of blood volume. So eventually it was coming through veins in his esophagus back to the heart, and those veins would rupture. He would bleed into his esophagus. It would drain into his stomach. Blood is an irritant to the GI tract, so he would vomit blood. And when he would vomit, it would tear away any clots that had formed to stop the bleeding, and the bleeding would start afresh, meaning he could bleed to death before we even got him to the hospital. So he had his first bleed right toward the end of that 6 months. And by this time, my husband had moved out and was living with his parents. And I would end up having to call neighbors sometimes in the middle of the night and say, please come over here and sit with my other two kids, or take them to your house, or whatever. I got to take my child to the ER. And from there, they would airlift him to Vanderbilt. And he had 6 of those bleeds, at least 6, and every time got airlifted to Vanderbilt. The last time they took him, they let me go on the flight too. Up until then, they don't let you go because they're afraid that the parent would panic if something happened and get in the way of them being able to treat the child and keep the child alive. But during one of the ER visits we made, they saw me with Daniel. He was actually trying to cough up a huge blood clot, and he got it to the back of his throat, but they had him reclined, on a bed. And they had a suction thing right next to him. The nurse had been periodically sucking clots out of his esophagus. But they were busy trying to get an IV in him and all this stuff. And I could see he was literally choking on it. So I, tried to call attention. Everybody was busy. So I just grabbed it myself and put it in there and sucked it out, and then soothed him. And they saw that and they said, "We don't think you're going to panic when, this happens. So we're going to let you go with him to Vanderbilt in the helicopter." I was very, very grateful for that. And so we were back and forth at Vanderbilt. I think our shortest visit there was about a week. The longest one was probably 2.5, maybe close to 3 weeks. And most of the time we would have, I think the longest time we had at home between those visits was a week. Before another bleed would happen, or one time we'd only been home 24 hours, and he developed abdominal pain, and I had to take him back to the emergency room, and they discovered that he had sepsis, and so had to airlift him to Vanderbilt, have surgery for that, and he just, poor little guy, went through the ringer. And one of those surgeries as well, they had an IV in his leg, and they had something going in called putrescin, and it does good things while it's in your bloodstream, but if it slips out and it gets into your tissues, it causes a third-degree burn, and it did. So he had a big third-degree burn on his ankle, and they had to do a skin graft from the back of his leg to be able to cover that. They had to put in a central line, and we had to learn to take care of that. Every time he had another bleed, we'd go to the hospital, and I learned to do ice water lavages, which is where you're pumping ice water into the stomach, and then drawing it back out, pumping it back out, so that you're getting all the blood out of the stomach so that they won't throw up again and tear away the clot. And several times they had to go in with scleral therapy, which is where they went and injected a dye into where the tear was in the esophagus. And that dye would cause scarring over, and it would cause it to scar more quickly and shut off the bleeding. The only danger was, of course, you do this too many times and there's so much scarring, he's not going to be able to get any food down. In May of 1986, when Daniel was about 3, he was number 1 on the list for a transplant in Dallas. There were only 3 places in the country that were doing liver transplants at all, of any age, and certainly pediatric ones. So we had already gone to Dallas to have the assessment done, etc. To me, I just thought it was your need, but it turns out that no, they look at the family too, because they want to know, if we give that child a liver, is the family going to do what it takes for that child to be able to keep that liver and keep that child alive? Because if they're not going to do what it takes, then we're not going to waste this liver on that child. It can go to some other child with a family who will do it. So I didn't realize I was being evaluated at the same time. God had um, had a way of working that out, because I think they were not looking favorably at me because I was there alone. I didn't have my husband with me. I had 2 other kids at home. And, by the way, insurance did not cover liver transplants back then. So my church at home was actually fundraising for me, trying to get enough money, because you had to have at least $100,000 before they would let you accept you into the program. They were fundraising for me, raising money so that we could, and then the word finally came that the insurance company would cover it. It was like the first time ever, and it was just in time for us. We were very, very grateful. But we still had to get through this evaluation at Dallas. And while we were there, they wanted to draw all this blood for, doing their testing. And I said, well, they already drew all of that at Vanderbilt and they've already got the results. And they said, we'd like to do our own. And I thought, oh, goodness. And so they said, he's got to be nothing per oral, not having eaten anything since midnight the night before. And the next morning, we're going to do all these tests before breakfast. And then, we'll have them all done and out of the way, and he'll be able to have his breakfast tray. And so they took him for all these different tests. And of course, it's scary to him. He's just 3.5 years old. And they finally bring him back to his room. And the last thing they need to do is draw more blood. And they go to draw the blood, and they can't get anything back. The veins were too small. They were collapsing. So they, tried another place, and finally they were down to saying, we're going to have to try a femoral stick, or in the femur, in the thigh. And by this time they stuck him 7 or 8 times already. And I thought, they've got all these tests at Vanderbilt. So I finally, they had brought in the breakfast tray, and it was waiting there. We could smell it. And, but they were not going to let him have it until they got the blood they needed. And they were going to try the femoral stick. And there's two nurses there, a male nurse and a female nurse. And the female nurse is saying, you can't do a femoral stick. That's against hospital protocol. And he said, we've got to. We can't get it from anywhere else. And she's like, it's against hospital protocol. And they're arguing right over him. And finally I said, you've got one more chance to draw this blood. Just one. And you've only got 10 minutes. And if you don't get it in 10 minutes, I'm going to feed him that tray, and that will ruin your test anyway. And they were like, well, we don't think you understand. If we don't have these tests, he's not going to be able to be approved for the... I said, what I do understand is they've already done these tests at Vanderbilt, and you can get those there. You can have all of that sent to you. I said, but you've got one more chance. And they said, okay, let's get somebody else in here. Next thing I know, in walks the head of the transplant team and a whole bunch of other people in his wake. And he comes in, he says, I understand you're not letting them draw his blood. And I thought, oh, great. Now I have the reputation of being the problem mom. And I said, no, I didn't say they couldn't draw it. I said they had 10 minutes and they had one chance. They've already stuck him 8 times, and they've done these same tests at Vanderbilt. And he said, somebody give me a needle. And he got it, and it wasn't a femoral stick, and he got it on the first try. And then he turned to me and he said, you did exactly right. And they told me later, we were not sure, because you were a single parent and because we didn't know anything about you, we weren't sure whether we could take a chance on you doing what was necessary. But after that, now we know. And yes, so he was number 1 on the list. But, back then it was a very rare thing for liver transplants to happen, especially for kids. We went back to Vanderbilt to wait, and I was wearing a beeper everywhere I went, just in case we got the call that they had a liver and we would have to be, on a plane and get him there. And they told me, if he has another bleed, we can't do scleral therapy again. So we're waiting at Vanderbilt. And one night I was sleeping on a couch in his room. And one night the nurse wakes me up and she says, his blood pressure has been dropping. And we're getting a space, a bed ready for him in the ICU. We need to know what's going on, but I just wanted to tell you. And I went over to his bed and I touched him, and he felt cold. And I pulled the covers up around him, and I got into the bed with him, and I cradled him in my arms to try and warm him up. Now, Daniel was a tease. He had blonde hair and brown eyes and the longest eyelashes on a boy that I've ever seen. And he knew how to use them to good effect too. He would duck his head like this and fan his eyes up like that, so those lashes would just be like that. He really was something of a ham, but he was a tease too, because if I asked him, I said, if I told him I loved him, he would just cuddle into my neck, and I'd say, "Do you love me?" And he'd say, "Maybe." I'd say, "Well, are you my boy?" "No." "Well, whose boy are you?" And he'd say, "Gan's boy." That was my mother. I called her Gan. "I'm Gan's boy." And I'd say, "Ah, Gan's boy, you're supposed to be my boy." And he'd just giggle and laugh. But here we were, I was cradling him that morning in my arms. And he said, "Mama." I said, "Yes, hon." He said, "I love you." I said, "I love you too." And after that, his speech got slurred. And he just went to sleep. And I saw his body struggling to suck in the air. And I knew he's having another bleed. He's hemorrhaging inside. But his face was placid. His body was struggling. But you couldn't tell it here. And then they came and got him and rushed him off to the ICU. And they said, "We want you to wait here. We'll call you when we've got him settled." And I said, "What do I do now, Lord? I don't know how long he might be in ICU. I don't know if they can stabilize him. I don't know what's going to happen." I went and splashed some water on my face, and while I was in there, I heard a knock at the door. And I went and opened it, and there was the head resident. No expression on his face. Just stood there and looked at me, and I said, "Give it to me straight." He said, "He's gone." And then he burst into tears. And I could see how much it affected him. And I put my arms around him. And we cried together right there. And I said, "It's okay. You did everything you knew how to do. You gave him the best you had. That's all you can do." And when I let go of him finally, I had left mascara on his white coat from where I'd been crying. And I thought, "Oh, you're going to have to wear that all day because it's like 7 o'clock in the morning." And then I thought, imagine me thinking something like this right after my son has passed away. Maybe God just knew I needed, some little distraction like that. But I still had to call my parents and tell them. Still had to call my husband's parents because that's where he was living at the time and tell them. And that was probably some of the. It's hard to hear other people hurt, and you can't help them. They had taken me into ICU after they kind of got him cleaned up, because even after they cleaned him up, they had him, waiting for me there on the bed. I came in and there was a trickle of blood coming out his nose right there, and they were so upset because they had tried to make sure I didn't see anything like that. And I said, "It's okay." And they had pulled a rocker in, and I sat down in the rocker, and they picked him up and set him in my arms. And the first thing I thought was, "He's not here." He's not here. I don't even know why I'm doing this. This is just the shell. And oh my, think where he is. Think who he's seeing and what he knows now that I only dream. But all I could do was worship. Just praise God that that he made a way for any of us to go there. I was so grateful that I had one secure in heaven and that I knew that. My dad took it upon himself to make the funeral arrangements so that I could focus my attention on the boys. And I remember after they prepared Daniel's body, brought it back from Nashville and prepared it, I took the boys to see him. And I had tried to explain to them, what made Daniel alive is not there anymore. So his body is not alive, and we don't need that anymore. Daniel doesn't need it anymore. He's alive in heaven. So we're going to bury this body in the ground. But you're going to get a chance to see it one more time before. And we went, and the boys had been asking lots of questions, and I thought they understood. But they got very quiet when they were looking at his body, and Jeremy touched him. And then he said, "Mama, did he used to be real?" And I said, "Yes, this body used to be real, but the part that made it real isn't there anymore." And that seemed to be it. That satisfied him. That was enough. We'd known since he was 6 weeks old. Because I know, here I was thinking I couldn't live with that knowledge, but because I know, I am mindful to be fully present every moment with him. How do you live with the knowledge that your child could die at any time? God had been showing me, you live with that knowledge about your other 2 kids, about your parents, about every person you know. You know that every one of them could die at any moment. We all live with that knowledge. We just don't have it on the front burner all the time. But having it on the front burner means you get to choose to be intentional. When it's on the back burner back there, a lot of times you choose to let the tyranny of the urgent take over, and you miss things. So it made me want to be more fully present for my other kids when I was there, more fully present when I was with my parents. I know they say that going through trials produces patience, but it just doesn't seem to me like patience is worth this. And God said, "Anita, you don't know how valuable patience is." So in the time I was waiting for Daniel while he was sleeping and so forth, I opened up that Bible and I started looking at every instance I could find where it talked about patience. And what I realized was that's fruit of the Spirit, which lasts forever. This body is temporary and it does not last forever. God has chosen at times to sacrifice what is temporary, suffering, the body we live in, the life we have right now, to give us something that is eternal, that we can never lose. It is worth it, even if I don't fully understand the value. There was another day that they had come in to draw blood or give Daniel a vitamin K shot, or I don't remember now what it was, but Daniel got so many sticks So many times they came in to stick him. And every time they would come in to stick him, he would beg for a Band-Aid. I want a Band-Aid, I want a Band-Aid, I want a Band-Aid. Because he knew when he got the Band-Aid, it was over. But they would put a Band-Aid around each finger, striping up his arm, both arms, and he didn't want you to take them off. So, I mean, he'd just wear them, all his fingers. And a day they came in again and said, oh, we got to draw some blood, or we got to, do another vitamin K shot. And Daniel would start crying, tears running down his cheeks. I want a Band-Aid, I want a Band-Aid. And I had taught him, we'd had a couple of instances where they came in, and of course, as soon as they stuck him, he would, jerk. Even though I'm holding him, he would jerk. The needle would come out, they'd have to stick him again. So I started reasoning with him as much as you can reason with a 3-year-old. And I said, do you want to get stuck once or twice? Once. I said, well, okay, then you need to hold still. So he would hold still. They would walk in and say, we're going to have to stick him. And he would say, I want a Band-Aid. Just stick his arm out and wait for it. The whole time crying. The nurse would, do what she had to do, and you could tell she's feeling it. She's just all in the feelings with him. Then she'd put that Band-Aid on, and he'd, thank you. And then she'd start crying. And one of those days when that happened, God said to me, that's the way I want you to be, Nina, with me. He doesn't understand what his liver even is. He doesn't understand what that liver disease is or what it's doing to him. He doesn't know why he needs a vitamin K shot or needs to have his blood drawn. But he trusts you. He trusts that nurse. He trusts your intentions toward him. So even when he's afraid, even when he's crying, he can put his arm out and submit. And even say thank you after. If you're a friend of someone who is going through this and you want to support them, here are my tips for that. First off, know that it's very isolating to be in that position. And at the same time, you don't want to have to communicate with everybody. Coming home from Vanderbilt on some of our stays there, I might have 50 messages on my answering machine. This was before cell phones, before texting. I'd have 50 messages, and every one of them would say, call me back when you get a chance. And I think, how am I going to have time to do that? I don't have time to call 50 people, different people. My kids haven't seen me. My other 2 kids haven't seen me in 2 weeks, and I need to spend the time with them. I don't know how soon we'll have to go back again. I loved it when I could play the answering machine and I would hear, Nina, you don't have to call me back. I just wanted you to know that we're thinking about you. I just wanted you to know that we're praying for you. Taking care of my kids, doing things for my kids when I could not be there. The Tillery's teaching my kids how to swim. Someone else inviting them over for the pool party or taking them to someone's birthday party when I couldn't be there to do it. That was huge. That was tremendous. What ministered to me when we were up there at the hospital, a city, several cities away, and we weren't seeing anybody from home. And I felt like, I don't even know what's going on. There's people back there I care about, and I can't even communicate with them. I don't know what's going on to them. And when I would call someone at the church and I would say, hey, tell me what's going on. How are things there? They didn't want to tell me about anything else happening because they felt like that was too much on me. That further isolated me. It made me feel like now I'm completely out of the loop because all they want to talk about when I get on the phone is what's happening with Daniel, what's happening with me, and then there's no more conversation. It's like, what? I'm not worried. I want to know. I just want to be part of the loop. I want to feel like I'm still part of things. It was huge to me when people would come all the way up from Huntsville to Nashville, even for an hour or two, just to see us, because that made me feel so thought of and loved. Something else that was very, very important to me, all those times that we got airlifted to Vanderbilt, a lot of those times I don't have my Bible with me. I don't even have a suitcase with me. So somebody being able to say, hey, do you need a toothbrush? Do you need, what do you need? Do you want some lotion? Do you need some socks? Do you need, can I get something from your house and bring it up to you? Yes, it's driving all that way, but, I'll be happy to do that for you. Or just to give you some cash so you can go down and get yourself a snack. Or when Daniel would be in surgery for something, to be able to leave the hospital while he was in surgery and go get myself, I didn't drink coffee, but go get myself something to eat or whatever, just something to take my mind off of the fact that I'm waiting for my child to get out of surgery and there's nobody here. Don't tell people, oh, this is just too much. This is just too much for one person to bear. Don't tell them, you don't deserve this. Well, they may not, but they're not getting it because they deserve it or they don't deserve it. Because the fact of the matter is, if I got what I deserved, well, it wouldn't be anything this light and easy. If I got what I deserved, I'd be in hell. And so would you. Having scripture there, because I had been so feasting on every word in that Bible, not having my Bible with me, not having any scripture with me, I felt the lack. I felt hungry for more. I'll never forget one time Daniel was in a step down unit. When they brought his tray, there was a little card with a scripture verse on it. And I thought, oh God, an answer to my prayer right here, there's some scripture right here. Or to find a Bible, like a Gideon Bible. Don't think that nobody ever reads those. If you're thinking they're in hotels and nobody ever looks, well, let me tell you, they put them in hospitals too. And yes, they are a lifeline. And then one day I got not my only piece of mail, but probably one out of maybe 3 pieces of mail in that entire 6 months that Daniel was in the hospital. And that I got at the hospital. I got mail to my house, which was great when we came back home. Loved that. But I got a card, and she wrote out every single verse of How Firm a Foundation into that card. I had told no one how God kept speaking the words of that song to me. And when she sent it to me and I got it, I was like, I know God gave you this to do. Specifically for me, to tell me He sees me. I share my faith by sharing stories like this with people, but even better, sharing with them the scriptures that God brought to life to me during those trials and the stories that I'm telling. One of the first ones He brought to life for me was Psalm 71, verses 20 and 21. Thou who hast showed me great and sore troubles, shalt quicken me again. Thou shalt bring me up again from the depths of the earth. Thou shalt increase my greatness and comfort me on every side.
So Nina, 150,000 people die every day. So if you died today, are you 100% sure that you would be with God in heaven?
Yes. Because He made the way. It doesn't have anything to do with me, with my ability. God gave me a picture, a mental image that I've never forgotten. It was like a little film And what God showed me first was my face, and I am clearly terrified. Just, and there is rain and there is lightning, and I'm hearing this thunder, and then it just kind of pans back, and you see my terrified face, and I'm holding on for everything in me to this giant thumb, like my life depends on it. And then you pan back even further, and you see that giant thumb is part of a very giant hand. And that giant hand is cradling me right there. And then I realize, oh, if I let go, I'm not going anywhere. That hand has me. I don't have that hand. So I could be resting instead of straining and striving to hold on. I could be resting and letting Him carry me.
Penn Jillette made a statement. If you are a Christian and you know that heaven and hell are real, how much do you have to hate someone not to tell them? That's powerful. So I want to share with you the good person test.
Okay.
This is something that we can talk to people about. It comes straight from the Bible about the rich young ruler that runs to Jesus. These are just a few of the 10 commandments we're going to go through, which is God's moral law. So have you ever told a lie in your life?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so what do you call a person that tells lies?
A liar.
So what are you?
I'm a liar.
Okay, have you ever stolen anything, even if the value was small? What do you call someone who steals?
A thief.
Okay, so you are
a thief.
Okay.
I'm a thief.
Have you ever taken the Lord's name in vain, said OMG, or just said it in an unholy way?
Probably. I don't remember it specifically, but probably, yes.
Okay, and in the Old Testament, that's called, well, in the Bible, it's called blasphemy. In the Old Testament, it's punishable by death.
Right.
And yet we use a holy God's name, gave us life. We use it as a swear word. And the last one, have you ever looked with lust?
Probably.
Okay.
I don't remember a specific incident, but I'm sure I have.
Okay, and Jesus says if you look with lust, you've committed adultery in your heart.
And that makes you an adulterer.
In the heart, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not judging you at all, but by your admission, you're a liar, a thief, a blasphemer, an adulterer at heart. So on Judgment Day, before God, who is a holy God and perfection is His standard, are you innocent or guilty?
I'm guilty.
Heaven or hell?
I'd be going to hell.
Okay, so what did God do to give all of us sinners the chance not to go to His prison, which is hell?
God became man and took the penalty of our sin on Himself.
And you know, a lot of people in the U.S., they know that Jesus died on a cross, and probably around the world, they know that. But what they don't know is what it means in legal terms. We broke God's law. Jesus paid the fine.
Yeah.
So that's what happened on that cross, is He paid the fine before He dismissed His spirit. He said, it is finished.
Yeah.
It's all done. So there's nothing we can do. There's no good works that you can do that will make a difference. It's all what Jesus did for us. So we just have to accept that free gift from Him to have eternal life in heaven.
So what I want people to know is, no, we're not getting what we deserved. God, in His grace, the suffering is a gift. It's the fellowship of His sufferings. He gives us the opportunity to be comforted by Him on every side and know what that means and find out who He is, to taste and see that the Lord is good. To know things about Him that we never understood before, or maybe we knew on a mental level, but we didn't know it here in our gut. We'd never seen it proved until we went through these things. And then we see God proving Himself, and we're able to tell other people. And that, to me, is that's how he quickens us. The quickening means brings us back to life again. I will not just give you life, but give you life more abundantly. He told me, Nina, you're not going to just survive. You feel like that's all that's going to happen because you feel like you're practically a little girl being thrust into an adult situation and having to make decisions that are life and death for someone you love, and you don't know what you're doing. That's what it feels like. But what you're going to see in this is that I am with you every step of the way. I will carry you. I will give you wisdom. It doesn't have anything to do with what your son's chances are. It has everything to do with what I choose. He quickened me again. He raised me up again from the depths of the earth. These experiences have totally changed the way I pray for people and the way I see suffering. I always used to pray for people and I just wanted them to be out of their suffering. I just wanted their, if they're sick, I wanted them healed. If they're going through some kind of hardship, I wanted their pain relieved or provision made for them. And I'm not saying that I don't pray for those things, but that's not what I pray first anymore. What I pray now is, God, do for them what you did for me. Make yourself real to them, more real than anyone they can see, anyone they can hear, anyone they can touch. Cause them to know that you are there and that you are for them and you are with them. And you are the one who has the keys to life and death. You are the one who has everything they need. You